Tonight, we uncover a secret so old, so immense, that the Vatican did more than bury it. They tried to erase it from human memory. A story written long before kingdoms rose, long before scripture was edited, long before the world was told what to believe. It speaks of a bloodline not fully human and not fully divine. A lineage born from the silent rebellion of celestial beings who crossed the boundary of heaven and touched the world of men. The Nephilim, the giants who once walked the earth, shaped civilizations, and left behind descendants the church never wanted you to find. Their bones were hidden, their stories twisted, their bloodlines scattered into dynasties, royal houses, and families who still guard secrets older than recorded history. And somewhere inside the locked vaults of the Vatican lies the truth they fear the most. The giants did not vanish. They adapted, they survived, they still walk among us. But before we descend into the archives of forbidden history, into the ruins, the missing texts, and the evidence buried beneath centuries of silence, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Because what you are about to hear rewrites the past the church tried hardest to control. Imagine a time long before pyramids touched the sky, and long before empires carved their names into stone. A time when the world was young, and the stories whispered around ancient fires spoke of beings so tall and so powerful that humans looked like children beside them. These were not myths to the people who lived back then. They were memories. Memories of the Nephilim, the giants who walked the earth. Their footprints appear in the earliest chapters of human history. In the Book of Genesis, long before the Great Flood, a strange passage describes the sons of God descending to earth and taking human women as wives. From that union came a race unlike anything seen before, part human, part something else. The Nephilim, mighty ones, giants of old. But the mystery does not end with scripture. Cultures across the world, even those separated by oceans and eras, tell stories that echo the same legend. The Sumerians wrote about towering demigods who ruled cities before the dawn of recorded history. The Greeks told of titans who once battled the gods. The people of the Andes carved enormous thrones in stone, thrones far too large for any normal human to sit on. The native tribes of North America spoke of red-haired giants who terrorized entire regions. It is as if humanity was trying to describe the same group of beings over and over again, only in different languages. Yet for some reason, the older these stories were, the more they were dismissed. Modern historians wave them away as fables or metaphors. But you have to ask yourself, why would so many civilizations invent the same kind of creature with the same traits and the same origin? What were they trying to remember? There are ruins on this planet that seem almost impossible to explain without imagining builders of enormous size or strength. Massive walls made of stones weighing more than 100 tons lifted and placed with a precision that even our best machines today struggle to match. Some of these structures date back so far that even archaeologists disagree about when they were built or who built them. And always, carved somewhere on the walls or hidden beneath layers of dust, you find figures that stand far taller than any normal human. The idea of giants sounds like fantasy until you notice how much evidence the ancient world left behind, bones that once surfaced in the 1800s. Old drawings and reports of skeletons more than 10 feet tall that mysteriously vanished soon after being discovered. Stories that were once printed in newspapers and then quietly forgotten. It makes you wonder if the past is far stranger than we are taught. The Nephilim were said to be powerful, violent, and difficult to control. Their presence grew so destructive that, according to ancient texts, they helped bring about the Great Flood. Humanity had been pushed to its limit, and the world was drowning in chaos, so the heavens intervened. But even after the waters receded, whispers of giants continued. They appear again later in the Bible as the Anakim, the Emim, and the Rephaim, tribes so fearsome that entire armies trembled at the sound of their names. If the world truly did once walk beside giants, what happened to them? Where did they go? And more importantly, why has their story been buried beneath centuries of silence? Perhaps the truth was never meant to disappear. It was only waiting for someone willing to ask the questions others were too afraid to touch. When people hear the story of the Great Flood, they often imagine it as a clean ending, a moment when the world reset and every trace of the giants vanished beneath rising waters. But if that were true, then why did giants keep showing up in ancient history long after the flood was supposed to wipe them out? How do the same terrifying names appear again in the Book of Numbers, describing tribes so large and powerful that even trained warriors felt like insects standing beside them? The truth is that many ancient texts hint at something the official story never fully explains. That the Nephilim bloodline did not end with the flood, it survived quietly, carefully, and through ways most people never notice. Some stories claim that one of the wives aboard the ark carried blood that was not entirely human. Others say that certain giants were not destroyed by the waters at all, but found refuge in hidden places, caves, mountains, or regions untouched by the flood. Whatever the truth is, by the time the world dried and humanity began to rebuild, the giants were already returning. The Bible describes them as the Anakim, the Rephaim, and the Zamzummim. Different names, different regions, but always the same description: tall beyond normal human height, overwhelmingly strong, and feared by every nation that encountered them. These tribes did not appear out of nowhere. They came from a lineage that refused to die, a lineage that carried the old blood. As centuries passed, that bloodline did not fade. It adapted, it blended. It hid itself inside families and tribes that eventually rose to power. Even today you can find stories from ancient kings claiming they descended from beings who were part human and part divine. Egyptian pharaohs believed they came from a heavenly line. Mesopotamian rulers described themselves as children of the gods. In South America, legends speak of tall, pale visitors who taught early civilizations how to build colossal stone temples. It is strange how these stories stretch across continents, yet they all point to the same unsettling idea that the blood of the giants did not vanish. It simply flowed into the veins of rulers, nobles, and families whose influence shaped the world. Some researchers even claim that certain royal bloodlines preserved unusual traits, such as extreme height or unusual physical strength. Traits that stood out just enough to be noticed, but not enough to draw suspicion. And for every clue that surfaced, there always seemed to be someone nearby ready to dismiss it or bury it, as if the truth was too dangerous to be allowed into the open. Ancient people believed that blood carried memory and power. If that is true, then imagine what it means if a fraction of giant blood still moves quietly through history, hiding in modern families and old dynasties. Perhaps this is why so many cultures told their children never to forget the giants. Perhaps they sensed that the story was not over. When a lineage refuses to die, it becomes a shadow, guiding the world from behind the scenes. And maybe the real question is not whether the Nephilim survived, but how much of their legacy still walks among us today without anyone noticing. There is a reason the story of the Nephilim makes certain people uncomfortable, and it has nothing to do with giants smashing cities or walking across ancient valleys. The real danger is what their existence implies. If the Nephilim were real, if beings who were part human and part something else once lived on Earth, then the clean and simple picture of creation that many were taught begins to crack, and no institution has more to lose from that crack than the Vatican. For centuries, the Church has presented a carefully shaped story about how the world began, who humans are, and what our place is under heaven. Everything in that story depends on one core idea. Humanity is unique, created directly by God, separate from angels, separate from every other being. But the moment you introduce the Nephilim, the moment you accept that the sons of God came down to earth and mixed with humans, everything changes. Humanity is no longer pure. The line between heaven and earth is no longer clean, and the ancient world becomes a place filled with beings who challenge the idea that mankind has only one origin. This is why the Book of Enoch was banned for so long. It goes into too much detail. It tells you the names of the angels who descended. It explains how they taught humans secrets they were not supposed to know. It describes how their children grew into giants who dominated entire regions. It paints a picture of ancient history that does not match the official version taught by the Church. If even part of that account is true, then humanity's earliest story is not a tale of simple beginnings. It is a tale of interference, rebellion, and hybrid bloodlines that should never have existed. To accept the Nephilim is to accept that heaven was not as distant as we think. It means the spiritual world was once physical enough to leave footprints in the dirt and bones in the ground. And it means that God was not the only influence shaping early humanity. For a religious institution built on the idea of divine order, nothing is more threatening. Imagine telling people that the great heroes and warriors of the ancient world might not have been entirely human. Imagine telling them that entire tribes in the Bible were targeted not because of their actions, but because of what they were. That they were descendants of a forbidden union. Suddenly, many events in Scripture become less about morality and more about cleanup. A cosmic correction of something that should never have happened. For centuries, the Church has avoided these questions by keeping certain texts locked away and discouraging any discussion about giants. Even today, most sermons skip past the verses in Genesis that mention them. They are treated like a strange detail that is easier to ignore than explain. Because once people begin asking who the Nephilim really were, they begin asking who we really are. And once they begin exploring that path, they might discover that human history is far more complicated than anyone has admitted. Perhaps the Vatican's fear is not that giants once walked the earth. It is that their story might reveal truths about our own origins that can no longer be controlled. There is a strange feeling you get when you read the early chapters of Genesis, almost like someone tore out pages from a book and hoped no one would notice. The story jumps from mysterious beings called the sons of God to the sudden appearance of giants to a world drowning in corruption without ever explaining what truly happened. It is as if the Bible is whispering about a larger story, one too dangerous to tell openly. That missing story can be found in the books that were removed. The Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Jasher, texts once respected by ancient communities, but later banned, hidden, or labelled unsafe for the public. These writings do not speak in riddles. They describe events in detail that Genesis only hints at. They reveal a version of early human history that explains the giants, the Watchers, and the rebellion that changed the world forever. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers are not distant spiritual beings. They are physical, present, and disobedient. 200 of them descend onto Mount Hermon with a plan to take human wives and create offspring who were never meant to exist. Enoch describes how the Watchers taught humans forbidden knowledge. Everything from weapon making to advanced astronomy. Knowledge that humans would not have discovered for thousands of years on their own. Their children, the Nephilim, grew into giants with enormous strength and terrifying hunger, consuming everything around them until the earth itself cried out. Suddenly, the flood story makes sense. It was not a random decision or a punishment for ordinary sin. It was a reset, a drastic measure to destroy the corruption caused by the Watchers and their giant offspring. The Book of Jubilees adds even more details. It describes the intense fear these beings inspired and how whole tribes of humans struggled to survive in their shadow. It explains how the Watchers continued to influence the world even after the flood, teaching more forbidden arts and creating more chaos. These books were once widely read. The early Christians knew them. The writers of the New Testament quoted them. Yet over time they disappeared from the canon. Why? Because they told a story that could not be controlled. They suggested that the spiritual world once interacted with humans in ways that challenged the simple picture of creation the church wanted to teach. They exposed the origin of evil not as a human flaw, but as the result of cosmic rebellion. They showed that humanity was caught in the middle of a conflict far bigger than itself. If the Book of Enoch had remained in the Bible, people might ask questions the church was not ready to answer. Questions about angels who broke laws. Questions about advanced knowledge that cannot be explained. Questions about bloodlines that should have died but survived. So the books were removed, tucked away in hidden libraries, labelled dangerous or unreliable. Yet the more you read them, the more you realise they fill the empty spaces in Genesis with uncomfortable clarity. Perhaps they were not removed because they were false. Perhaps they were removed because they revealed too much truth. Long before the rise of the first kingdoms, and long before humans learned how to shape metal or chart the sky, there was a moment when the world changed forever. It began on a lonely mountain that pierced the clouds, a place ancient cultures called sacred and feared at the same time. Mount Hermon. According to the old texts, this is where the Watchers came down. They were not demons or monsters. They were angels, powerful beings created to watch over humanity from a distance. Their purpose was simple: guide but never interfere, observe but never touch. Yet something drew them toward the world below, something stronger than their duty: curiosity, desire, a hunger to experience life as humans did. The Book of Enoch describes how 200 of these angels made a decision that would alter the fate of the world. They descended onto Mount Hermon and swore an oath together that none of them would try to escape the consequences. They knew what they were about to do was forbidden. Heaven had strict laws about crossing the boundary between the spiritual and human realms. But the Watchers ignored those laws. Once they reached Earth, they took human women as wives. These unions were never meant to happen. From them came children who were neither fully human nor fully angel. The Nephilim, giants with incredible strength and intelligence. Beings who grew so large and powerful that entire regions lived in fear of them. But the danger did not stop with their size. The Watchers began teaching humans knowledge that had been hidden since the beginning of time. They introduced metalworking and warfare. They taught astrology, enchantments, and the movement of the heavens. They explained secrets about the earth that humans were not ready to understand. Knowledge is power, but in the wrong hands it can become destruction. Soon the world was filled with chaos. Humans turned the Watchers' teachings into weapons. The Nephilim began dominating everything around them, consuming food, resources, and even people. They were unstoppable. The stories say that the earth itself groaned under their weight. What was meant to be guidance turned into corruption. The Watchers, who were supposed to protect humanity, had instead become the architects of its suffering. Word of their rebellion reached the higher realms. According to the old writings, the archangels were sent to restore balance. Michael, Raphael, Gabriel. They were ordered to bind the Watchers and cleanse the earth of their offspring. A great judgment was coming, one that would wipe out the giants and bury the Watchers deep beneath mountains and deserts. The flood was not just punishment for human wrongdoing, it was a final attempt to erase the damage caused by the forbidden union. Yet even after the waters receded, whispers of the Watchers' influence remained. Their actions left scars on history, traces of knowledge and power that humanity did not forget. When you understand the story of the Watchers, you see that the world did not fall into darkness by accident. It was shaped by beings who broke the law of heaven and paid the price. But their legacy continued through the giants who survived and through the secrets they taught. Secrets that some believe the world was never meant to know. Long before any human kingdom rose or fell, there was a war that shaped the entire fate of the world. A war most people have never heard of because the details were buried in books the Vatican kept out of sight. According to the Book of Enoch and the ancient writings that survived in scattered fragments, the first great battle for humanity was not fought by men, it was fought by beings of heaven. After the Watchers descended onto earth and created the Nephilim, the world began to collapse under their influence. The giants grew larger and hungrier every year. They consumed animals, then crops, then entire villages. People cried out for help because nothing on earth could stop these beings. The corruption spread so fast that even the heavens could feel it. The archangels saw what the Watchers had done and understood that if nothing changed, humanity would be wiped out, so they prepared for war. This was not a battle of swords or armies. This was a cosmic intervention, a clash between beings of pure light and creatures born from forbidden unions. Enoch describes how Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel were given commands that shook the foundations of the world. Michael was ordered to bind the leaders of the Watchers so that they could never rise again. Raphael was told to heal the earth from the poison created by their teachings. Gabriel was instructed to destroy the giant offspring who were destroying creation. Uriel was sent to warn Noah that a great cleansing was coming and that only those who followed the divine command would survive. While humans struggled below, a heavenly battle began above them. The Watchers tried to defend their children, but they were no match for the archangels, who carried out the judgment with unbreakable force. One by one, the giants fell. Their massive bodies crumpled beneath storms, lightning, earthquakes, and floods. Their strength meant nothing against the decree from heaven. The Watchers themselves faced a harsher fate. They were bound hand and foot, sealed in deep caverns beneath mountains and deserts, trapped until the final judgment, their shining forms twisted with regret and rage. What once made them powerful was now the very thing that condemned them. The world did not simply flood on its own. The flood was part of a larger plan. It was the final stage of the war. Water washed away the remains of the giants and buried their cities and monuments beneath layers of earth so deep that only fragments would survive. To ancient people, this was the first great apocalypse, a moment when the heavens themselves intervened to save humanity from extinction. But this story was not comforting. It revealed a world where angels could rebel, where giants could rule, and where humans were caught between forces far beyond their understanding. This is one reason the Church hid these accounts. They complicate the idea of a peaceful heaven watching calmly over the world. Instead, they reveal a universe filled with conflict, power, and danger. A universe where the first war for humanity was fought long before humans even knew it had begun. And even after the giants were defeated, the echoes of that war lived on in the legends, ruins, and whispers that still haunt our history. When people imagine the world after the flood, they think of a clean slate, a fresh beginning, a world where everything dangerous had been washed away. But the Bible itself reveals something that many overlook. The giants did not disappear. They returned. Or perhaps they never left at all. This single detail created a silent panic among early theologians because it challenged everything they believed about the flood and about divine judgment. In the Book of Numbers, a group of Israelite spies enter the land of Canaan and come back trembling with fear. They say they saw the Anakim there, descendants of the giants. They describe themselves as tiny like grasshoppers, standing next to beings so tall and strong that no army could hope to defeat them. These were not stories from the distant past. These were first-hand reports from a time long after Noah and the Ark. The Bible names the tribes clearly: the Rephaim, the Anakim, the Emim, groups so feared that entire regions avoided them. Their cities had walls that reached the sky. Their warriors were so large that normal humans could barely lift their weapons. One king from Bashan named Og is described as having a bed more than 13 feet long, a detail the text shares as casually as if it were common knowledge. These giants were not isolated. They were spread across the Middle East, living in territories that would later become biblical battlegrounds. This is what terrified early scholars. If the Nephilim were destroyed in the flood, then where did these giants come from? How did they survive? What loophole allowed their bloodline to continue? Some theories whisper that one of Noah's daughters-in-law carried giant ancestry. Others suggest that certain watchers escaped punishment and attempted to rebuild their legacy in secret. Whatever the truth is, the presence of giants after the flood proved that the ancient problem was not fully erased. It was only pushed back for a time. This continuity made the church uneasy. It implied that humanity was still sharing the world with remnants of the forbidden union, remnants that God had once destroyed an entire world to remove. If these giants continued to appear, then history was not following a simple divine plan. It was repeating itself. Even more troubling is how carefully the Bible mentions these tribes without ever explaining how they returned. It simply lists them as if everyone already knew, as if their existence needed no explanation. Ancient cultures outside the Bible reported the same thing. The Phoenicians, Egyptians, and Sumerians described encounters with tall, powerful beings long after the supposed extinction of the giants. These records line up almost perfectly with the biblical accounts. When all these clues are put together, a new picture forms. The flood was not the end of the Nephilim line. It was only the beginning of a long struggle to keep their influence from rising again. Early theologians tried to hide this fear by avoiding the subject entirely. They focused on safer ideas and left the giants buried in the text, hoping no one would ask questions. But the giants were there long after the waters fell. They ruled cities, they fought wars, they shaped nations. And their survival hints that the world after the flood was far stranger and far more dangerous than anyone was meant to know. In the 19th century, something strange began happening all across the world. Farmers digging new fields, construction crews clearing land, explorers opening ancient mounds. Ordinary people kept stumbling upon something that should not have existed in the modern age. Giant bones. Not slightly tall remains or unusually large humans. These were skeletons measuring 8, 9, even 10 feet long. Some had skulls twice the size of a normal person. Others had unusual features like double rows of teeth or bones, thicker than anything found in medical records. Newspapers from the time openly reported these discoveries. Headlines told of enormous skeletons unearthed in the Ohio Valley, more found in Tennessee, others in Wisconsin. Reports came from Nevada, where miners uncovered red-haired giants buried in caves. The strange thing is that these discoveries were treated as important at first. Local papers described them in detail. Photographs were taken. Curiosity spread. But soon after each report, something unexpected happened. The bones disappeared. Sometimes a major institution would arrive, take the remains, and then never display them. Sometimes the collectors claimed the bones crumbled during transport. Sometimes no one recorded what happened at all. It was as if the discoveries simply melted out of history. One of the most famous examples comes from the late 1800s, when a group of men excavated an ancient burial mound in West Virginia. They uncovered several enormous skeletons arranged carefully with artifacts that hinted at a lost culture. The remains were sent to the Smithsonian for study, but when researchers asked to see them years later, they were told no such skeletons existed. Others told similar stories. A farmer in Minnesota uncovered bones larger than any recorded species. Scientists collected them, but the trail vanished soon after. In France, workers found an entire burial chamber filled with giant remains. The site was sealed, and no further reports were allowed. In India, explorers wrote of giant skeletons discovered in mountain caves. The remains were supposedly taken for study, but no museum ever displayed them. Over and over again, the pattern repeated. Bones are found. They are reported. Then they are gone. The strange part is that during this time, the idea of giants was not rare. Early archaeologists knew Native American legends of ancient tall beings. They knew biblical references to Rephaim and Anakim. They knew similar stories existed in Asia, Africa, and Europe. Yet as more bones were found, the reaction shifted from curiosity to silence. It was almost as if someone wanted the subject to disappear. Some researchers believe institutions feared that giant bones would challenge accepted theories about human evolution. Others think the remains did not fit the clean timeline of history being taught at the time. And then there are those who believe the bones threatened something deeper. A connection to the ancient Nephilim stories that the church had spent centuries trying to suppress. Whatever the reason, the world lost countless pieces of physical evidence that could have rewritten history. The bones were real enough to be reported, real enough to be collected, but not real enough to be preserved. And that silence left behind only one question. Were they hidden to protect science, or to protect a secret far older than the modern world? For thousands of years, kings and queens ruled by claiming something no common person could argue with. They said their power came from the heavens. They said their blood was different, pure, sacred, chosen. At first it sounds like simple politics, a clever way to control people. But when you look deeper into the oldest royal bloodlines, a stranger pattern begins to appear. Many of these rulers were described as unusually tall or impossibly strong. Some were said to have glowing eyes or voices that carried farther than any normal person. Ancient scribes wrote about kings who stood a full head above the tallest soldiers, and queens who possessed knowledge far beyond what their time period should have allowed. These legends stretch across continents. In Egypt, the pharaohs claimed to descend from gods who walked among humans. Their statues show rulers with towering frames and elongated skulls. In Mesopotamia, the earliest kings said their ancestors lived for centuries, something that mirrors the long lifespans described for the Nephilim. In Ireland, the old stories speak of tall, shining beings who ruled before ordinary humans arrived. Even in Asia, the first emperors insisted they were born from star beings who came down from the sky. Everywhere you look, the same theme repeats. Height, power, divine origin, traits that match what the ancient texts said about the Nephilim. Over time, these bloodlines did not disappear. Instead, they hid themselves inside noble families and royal dynasties. They guarded marriages carefully, making sure their blood mixed only with certain houses. This practice continued for centuries, and the reason is simple. They believed their strength came from their ancestry, from something ancient, something not entirely human. Some researchers today point out that many European royal families share genetic markers that appear unexpectedly concentrated compared to the general population. This might not mean much on its own, but when paired with the old descriptions and myths passed down through generations, it raises unsettling questions. Why did so many rulers have unusual height or strength that stood out in their own time? Why did early historians write about kings whose physical size intimidated entire nations? Why did people across cultures believe their rulers came from star beings or godlike ancestors? And why did so many dynasties protect their bloodlines with such extreme care, as if they feared losing more than political power? The idea of divine right takes on a darker meaning when you consider that some rulers may have believed they inherited something ancient inside their bodies, something that connected them to the Nephilim, something that made them feel entitled to rule over others. The Church did not like these stories. They contradicted the clean version of human history the Vatican wanted to teach. If rulers truly carried traces of a forbidden lineage, then the world was not shaped by divine choice but by ancient genetics. This possibility made early theologians uncomfortable, so they pushed the myths aside and replaced them with safer explanations. But the legends never faded entirely. They survived in royal symbols, in family crests, and in whispered stories passed down through generations. Maybe the real mystery is not whether the Nephilim survived the flood. Maybe the real mystery is how much of their bloodline still moves quietly through the families that once ruled the world. When people think of the Knights Templar, they imagine warriors in white cloaks, charging into battle or guarding treasure on distant roads. But the true story of the Templars begins not on the battlefield, but deep beneath the stones of Jerusalem. When the order was formed in the early 12th century, their official mission was to protect pilgrims travelling to the Holy Land. Yet for the first 9 years of their existence, the Templars did something unusual. Instead of patrolling roads they dug beneath the ruins of the Temple Mount, the most sacred and most mysterious site in all of Jerusalem. The question is why? What were they looking for in the dark tunnels and forgotten chambers hidden below the ancient city? Some historians believe they were searching for relics of the first temple. Others claim they sought documents from the time of Solomon. But there are more secretive theories. Ones that whisper that the Templars were hunting for traces of the earliest stories ever told. Stories of the Watchers. Stories of the Nephilim. According to ancient texts, the land around Jerusalem once held giants. The Bible describes battles with the Rephaim, who lived in the surrounding regions. Old Canaanite legends speak of giant kings who ruled the valleys, and Mount Hermon, where the Watchers descended, lies only a short distance to the north. If any place on earth held relics of the giants, it would be buried somewhere in that land. Some researchers believe the Templars uncovered scrolls that describe the forbidden union between the Watchers and human women. Others claim they found bones unlike anything seen before, enormous fragments sealed inside stone containers. There are even stories that they discovered tools or weapons crafted by a race far stronger than humans. Whatever they found, it changed them. When the Templars emerged from their years of underground searching, they were no longer simple knights. They became wealthy, powerful, and frighteningly organized. Their knowledge grew. Their influence spread across Europe. They built structures with architectural techniques far beyond what was common for their time. Some say their sudden rise makes sense only if they uncovered secrets meant to stay hidden, secrets about ancient beings who once shaped the world. The Vatican watched the Templars carefully. At first the Church supported them, but over time their independence became threatening. When rumours spread that the order held forbidden knowledge, the kind of knowledge the Church had spent centuries burying, the Templars were targeted. In the early 1400s, the Vatican and the French crown destroyed the order in a single sweeping attack. Many Templars were arrested. Others were tortured for confessions. Most of their documents and treasures vanished. Yet legends claim that a small group escaped, carrying with them whatever they had found beneath Jerusalem. Some say those relics included proof of the Nephilim bloodline, proof that angels had once walked the earth and left behind descendants, proof that threatened the Church more than any army ever could. If the Templars truly unearthed such secrets, then their destruction was not about money or power. It was about silence. Silence to protect a version of history that the world was never meant to question. For centuries, the Vatican has held a reputation as a guardian of spiritual truth, a place where ancient knowledge is preserved with care. But behind that reputation lies another story, a quieter one, a hidden one, a story of information erased, discoveries silenced, and history rewritten piece by piece. When you follow the clues, scattered across old documents and strange events from the past, a pattern begins to reveal itself. A pattern that looks very much like a long and silent war against the memory of giants. It began with early church councils, when leaders debated which books belonged in the Bible and which were too dangerous for ordinary people to read. Texts that mentioned the Watchers or the Nephilim were removed. The Book of Enoch, which explained giants in detail, was banned completely. The Book of Jubilees and the Book of Jasher suffered the same fate. These were not random decisions, they were strategic. By erasing the stories of giants, the church could present a simpler version of creation. A version where humans never mixed with heavenly beings, and where early history was clean and controlled. As centuries passed, the church went beyond banning texts. They issued decrees that restricted what scholars could study or publish. Early monks who questioned the missing chapters of Genesis were warned or punished. Libraries destroyed old manuscripts that mentioned giants. Scribes revised translations so uncomfortable details disappeared. But the most telling evidence of this silent war appears in archaeology. During the 19th and early 20th centuries, when giant bones were being found around the world, something strange kept happening. Whenever discoveries threatened the official narrative, powerful institutions stepped in. In many cases, Catholic authorities were involved. Researchers reported digs being shut down. Priests insisted that remains be taken for religious burial. Other times, bones were sent to museums, where they vanished into storage, never to be displayed. In Italy, the Vatican pressured archaeologists to avoid publishing findings that hinted at prehistoric giants. In France, church officials sealed several cave sites where unusually large skulls had been recovered. In South America, missionaries destroyed local records that described encounters with tall beings the native people considered ancient enemies. Even in the Holy Land, archaeologists working near old biblical sites were required to give the church first access to anything discovered. Anything that contradicted accepted doctrine was quietly removed, never explained, never seen again. Papal archives contain letters from bishops warning that stories of ancient giants would cause confusion among believers. Other documents show church leaders instructing scholars to avoid discussing the sons of God mentioned in Genesis. They feared people would begin asking questions about angels who broke heavenly laws, questions about the true origin of certain tribes, questions about bloodlines that should not exist. Every major institution hides information, but the Vatican's silence has lasted more than 1,000 years. Too long to be a simple misunderstanding, too controlled to be an accident. It is as if the church was determined to bury not just the giants themselves, but the memory of their existence. Because if the world ever accepted that the Nephilim were real, then the entire structure of official history would shake, and the Vatican would no longer stand as the sole gatekeeper of truth. Hidden beneath the marble floors of Vatican City lies a place almost no one is allowed to see. A place whispered about by scholars, avoided by officials, and sealed behind locked doors thicker than the walls of medieval castles, the Vatican Secret Archives. The name alone makes people imagine shelves filled with dusty scrolls and forbidden books, but the truth is far stranger. The archives stretch for miles underground. They hold more than 1,000 years of documents, letters, maps, and manuscripts. Only a handful of people are granted limited access, and even they are allowed to request only specific items. They cannot wander, they cannot explore, they cannot know what lies beyond the sections chosen for them. Yet rumours continue to surface about the deepest rooms. Rooms filled with manuscripts the church has chosen never to release. Manuscripts that describe things the world is not supposed to remember. Some claim these documents include early drafts of Genesis with passages that were removed before the Bible was finalized. These drafts supposedly mention the Watchers more clearly and describe the forbidden unions that produced the Nephilim in far greater detail. Others speak of ancient letters exchanged between early church leaders as they argued over what to do with the stories of giants that kept appearing in the old Hebrew texts. One letter describes a bishop warning that allowing people to read about the Nephilim would lead to confusion and fear. Another warns that knowledge of hybrid bloodlines would undermine the idea that humanity was created pure and untouched. Then there are the rumours about scrolls taken from Jerusalem during the Crusades. Some believe the Knights Templar discovered writings hidden beneath the Temple Mount, and that these texts were quietly transported to Rome before the order was destroyed. These scrolls supposedly include accounts of the Watchers describing their descent onto Mount Hermon and their interactions with early humanity. They may even include descriptions of the Nephilim themselves. The archives are also said to contain classified reports from missionaries in the 17 and 1800s. These missionaries travelled to remote parts of the world and heard stories that matched the ancient tales of giants. Some claim to have found oversized bones or strange artifacts that suggested non-human origins. Their reports were sent back to Rome for study but never released. No one outside the highest levels of the church knows what conclusions were drawn. Another rumour speaks of a sealed cabinet labelled only with a date written in ancient script. Inside are said to be parchments that describe a group of early Christians who believed that certain noble families carried remnants of the Nephilim bloodline. They debated whether these families should be destroyed or protected, and their arguments became so fierce that the church supposedly hid the entire discussion away. Archivists who once worked in the upper levels of the archives have admitted off-record that there are indeed restricted chambers that only the Pope and a few trusted scholars may enter. What lies in those rooms remains unknown, but if there is any place on earth where proof of the Watchers or written evidence of hybrid bloodlines might exist, it would be buried within those locked rooms beneath the Vatican. Whatever the archives contain, the Church has decided that the world is not ready to see it. And perhaps that silence speaks louder than any manuscript ever could. Long before European explorers reached the shores of the Americas, the native tribes already carried stories of an ancient enemy, a race of towering red-haired giants who roamed the land with great strength and overwhelming cruelty. These legends were not isolated to a single tribe. They were shared across the continent, from the Paiute of Nevada to the Cherokee of the southeast to the tribes of the Great Lakes. Every group described similar beings, tall, fierce, and strangely different from ordinary humans. The most famous story comes from the Paiute people. They spoke of the Si Teka, a race of giants with red or copper-coloured hair who lived in the caves and hunted smaller tribes. The Paiute described them as powerful beings who towered over normal humans. According to the legend, the tribes eventually united to trap the giants inside a cave and smoke them out. Many years later, in the early 1900s, miners excavating Lovelock Cave in Nevada discovered something that shocked them. They found giant sandals, giant handprints, and woven clothing far too large for any normal person. Most shocking of all, they found mummified remains, some with strands of red hair still clinging to their skulls. The miners reported skeletons measuring more than 7 feet tall, and in some cases even taller. But once the information reached major institutions, the pattern repeated. Bones were taken away for study, then disappeared. The Smithsonian received several crates of artifacts from Lovelock Cave, yet almost none of them were ever displayed. Some researchers asked to examine the remains, but were told they had been misplaced or lost. Similar stories appear across North America. In Ohio, enormous burial mounds yielded skeletons with red or blonde hair and oversized skulls. In Tennessee, workers uncovered giant bones with unusual dental patterns. In Minnesota, a burial site revealed remains measuring nearly 9 feet tall. In each case, the discoveries were quickly collected, sometimes by government agents, sometimes by museum officials, and then vanished. Native elders have long said these giants were not simply tall people. They believed the red-haired beings came from a different line entirely, an ancient bloodline that arrived long before their own tribes. Some claimed these giants descended from star beings, or sky spirits, who mixed with humans in the earliest ages. Others believed they were the remnants of a corrupted race, the same beings described in ancient texts from across the world. When researchers pointed out that these stories sounded similar to the Nephilim described in Genesis and the Book of Enoch, the connections became impossible to ignore. If tribes separated by thousands of miles all remembered the same kind of beings, then perhaps their stories were rooted in something real. Yet mainstream institutions have consistently downplayed or ignored these discoveries. Some accuse the Smithsonian of intentionally suppressing evidence of giants. Others believe the remains threatened accepted theories about early human migration and had to be removed to protect academic control. Whatever the reason, one truth remains. The legends of the red-haired giants did not fade. They survived through generations of storytelling, and they gained even more strength as physical discoveries kept matching the ancient descriptions. Whether these giants were the descendants of the Nephilim or another forgotten race, their memory continues to haunt the land they once walked. Across the world, there are structures so massive and so perfectly built that even modern engineers stare at them in disbelief. Stones weighing hundreds of tons sit stacked with impossible precision. Blocks fit together so tightly that not even a knife blade can slip between them. Entire walls rise in patterns no ancient tool should have been able to carve. These places are often called megalithic, but a better word exists: cyclopean. It means built by giants. And for many ancient cultures, that was not a metaphor. It was a memory. One of the greatest examples stands in Lebanon at a site called Baalbek. Here lies the Trilithon, 3 stones, each weighing around 800 tons, placed so perfectly that no crane today could lift them with ease. Legends say the structure was built by beings known as the Rephaim. In the Bible, the Rephaim were giants. In local folklore, they were the children of beings who came down from the sky. No one knows how the stones were moved. No one knows who cut them. All we have is the physical proof and a silence that stretches across centuries. Far away in Peru, another puzzle waits at a place called Sacsayhuaman. Massive stones, shaped like puzzle pieces, locked together with such accuracy that earthquakes cannot shake them apart. Some of these stones stand taller than a person. Others weigh more than 100 tons. The Incas took credit in later times, but even they admitted these walls were ancient long before their empire existed. They claimed a race of giants built them. Strong beings who could lift stones no human could ever move. Similar mysteries appear across the Middle East. In the region of Bashan stands the supposed bed of King Og, described in the Bible as the last of the Rephaim. His bed was said to be enormous, more like a stone platform than furniture. Nearby, ancient ruins show foundations built with rock so large that no normal building crew could have placed them. In Israel and Jordan, megalithic circles and dolmens stretch across the landscape. Many are aligned with star paths, as if created by beings deeply familiar with the movement of the heavens. Each continent carries its own version of these impossible works. Easter Island, with its towering moai. Turkey, with the ancient stones of Göbekli Tepe. The Caucasus, with cyclopean fortresses that predate recorded history. Everywhere the pattern repeats. Massive stones, precision beyond logic. No clear explanation. Ancient societies always blamed giants. Modern researchers avoid that word, but the evidence never changes. When the Bible speaks of giants who lived before and after the flood, it speaks of being strong enough to reshape landscapes. When the Book of Enoch describes the Nephilim as creatures of power and size, it matches the abilities needed to move stones weighing hundreds of tons. These structures may not just be architectural wonders. They may be physical fingerprints left behind by a race that should not have existed according to the official story. And this is why the topic makes so many institutions uncomfortable. If giants built these structures, then human history is not what we think it is. It is older, stranger, and shared with beings far beyond normal humanity. Evidence too large to ignore stands in stone all over the world. The question is not whether giants existed, but why so much effort has been spent trying to deny who built the world we walk on. High in the northern stretch of ancient Israel rises a mountain that has carried whispers for thousands of years. Mount Hermon, a place so old that its name appears not only in the Bible but in Sumerian tablets, Canaanite myths, and forgotten writings buried in desert caves. To most people, it is just a snowy peak shared by Lebanon, Israel, and Syria. But to the ancient world, it was something far more mysterious. They believed it was a doorway, a boundary between heaven and earth, a gate used by beings who were never meant to walk among humans. According to the Book of Enoch, Mount Hermon is where the Watchers descended in the earliest ages of the world. These Watchers were not ordinary angels, but powerful celestial beings tasked with observing humanity. Instead, they broke the most sacred law of heaven. They chose to interfere. They chose to take human women. And from their union came the Nephilim, the giants who filled the earth with violence and knowledge that humans were not ready for. When the Watchers landed on Mount Hermon, the story says the earth trembled. They made a pact bound by an oath to carry out their plan no matter the cost. That oath gave the mountain its ancient name. Hermon means to be bound or to swear an oath. Even today, the mountain carries the weight of that legend, as if the story never faded completely. Many ancient cultures believed the air around Mount Hermon was different, that the mountain was a thin place where the invisible world touched the visible. Israelite texts describe it as a region filled with supernatural activity. Pagan temples once stood along its slopes, where worshippers claimed to encounter strange beings. Even the Greeks built shrines there, believing the mountain was connected to the realm of the gods. What makes the story even stranger is how spiritually contested the land around Hermon has always been. For thousands of years, empires fought for control of it. The Romans, the Crusaders, the Ottomans, and modern nations each saw it as strategically important. Yet beneath the political reasons, there was always a sense that something deeper lay hidden in the mountain's shadow. Some believe the Watchers chose Hermon because it was a natural gateway, a place where the barrier between dimensions was weaker. Others think the mountain's unusual energy comes from something buried within it. Stories from early explorers describe strange lights near the summit at night, and sudden shifts in wind that seemed almost unnatural. The tribes who lived nearby spoke of tall beings seen wandering the forests in ancient times. They believed these beings were the remnants of the Nephilim who survived long after the flood. Even today, Mount Hermon remains surrounded by mystery. Military bases guard its peaks, archaeological digs are restricted, and strange ruins lie scattered across its slopes, including ancient altars that point directly toward the stars. Some researchers believe the mountain still hides secrets from the time of the Watchers. Secrets that could explain why so many religions viewed the place as sacred and dangerous at the same time. Mount Hermon is more than a legend. It is a reminder of a moment when heaven touched earth, a moment that changed human history forever. And maybe the reason the region is still contested is because someone knows that what descended there thousands of years ago did not vanish completely. For thousands of years, blood has been treated as something more than a biological fluid. In ancient cultures, it was seen as a bridge between worlds, a carrier of power, memory, and identity. And when you study the legends surrounding the Nephilim, the Watchers, and the giants who once walked the earth, the importance of blood becomes impossible to ignore. If hybrid beings once existed, and if some trace of their lineage survived through royal families and hidden tribes, then blood would be the key to everything. Not gold, not land, not armies, blood. That idea may sound like myth, yet it appears again and again in the rituals of ancient civilizations. The Egyptians believed their pharaohs carried divine blood. The Sumerians claimed the first kings were shaped by the gods. The Celts preserved the bloodlines of their tall warrior families through strict marriage laws. Everywhere the pattern repeats. Blood is sacred, blood is power, and some blood is not like the rest. As the centuries passed, this belief did not vanish. It moved into secret societies and hidden circles. Many researchers argue that certain modern elites still follow these ancient ideas. They perform rituals not for religion, but for lineage. Rituals meant to preserve, protect, or awaken whatever remains of the old hybrid blood. These claims became stronger after the discovery of strange ceremonies practiced behind closed doors in Europe during the 1700s and 1800s. Witnesses described gatherings where noble families took part in symbolic blood drinking or blood sharing acts they believed would strengthen their lineage. They said these rituals were meant to bind families together in a pact older than any nation. Some historians brushed off these accounts as superstition. Others noticed they resembled fragments of ancient Nephilim stories, especially the ones describing how the giants sought to preserve their bloodline as the world turned against them. Even in modern times, rumours continue to circle around private groups. Researchers speak of elite families who guard their DNA records in secret vaults. They mention gatherings where attendees symbolically mix blood to represent the merging of powerful houses. Some even claim certain families avoid marrying outside their circle because they believe their blood carries something ancient, something they want to keep alive. Whether these rituals are symbolic or literal depends on who you ask. Some believe they are harmless traditions meant to honour ancestry. Others think these practices are attempts to awaken dormant traits linked to strength, intuition, or unusual intelligence. The most unsettling idea is that some rituals are meant not to preserve, but to conceal. If a family carries traces of hybrid blood, they may perform ceremonies to keep that lineage hidden from outsiders. In that sense, the ritual becomes a veil, a way of protecting their identity while continuing a legacy that stretches back to the time before the flood. Institutions like the Vatican have always condemned these practices, but their secrecy surrounding the Nephilim stories suggests a deeper fear. If hybrid bloodlines still exist, even in tiny fragments, it means the ancient world never truly ended. It lives on in certain families, in hidden traditions, and in rituals performed far from the public eye. And maybe the reason these ceremonies continue is because those who carry the ancient blood know that one day the truth about their origins may come to light. In the last few decades, science has opened doors that ancient people could only describe through stories. DNA testing now reveals hidden ancestry, rare mutations, and unusual physical traits that pass silently from one generation to the next. Most of these discoveries are harmless, but some are strange enough to raise old questions from a time the world has tried to forget. Questions about giants, questions about the Nephilim, questions the Vatican has been watching very closely. Around the world, researchers have documented rare cases of extreme height that cannot be explained by normal genetics. Some people grow far taller than their families without any known medical disorder. Their bones develop with unusual density. Their skulls appear thicker than average. Some have footprints much larger than normal humans. These traits do not match simple gigantism. They seem to follow certain bloodlines, as if something ancient still lingers in their DNA. Then there are the reports of families with 6 fingers or 6 toes, not as deformities, but as stable inherited traits. In the Bible, the Rephaim were described as having 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. For centuries, scholars dismissed this as myth. Yet modern geneticists have found isolated populations where this exact trait still appears. It does not spread widely. It clings to certain families, almost as if it is being preserved. Another mystery comes from elongated skulls found in parts of Peru, Africa, and the Middle East. Many were shaped intentionally by ancient rituals, but not all of them. Some skulls show natural elongation, larger cranial volume, and suture patterns that do not match normal human anatomy. Tests on these skulls reveal mitochondrial DNA with unusual markers that do not fit typical human classifications. Even stranger is how quickly some of these discoveries disappear from the public eye. Research groups lose funding. Museums hide the results. Institutions offer explanations that feel rushed or incomplete. Behind the scenes, the Vatican pays attention to all of it. They always have. For centuries, they have tracked stories of giants, unusual bones, and anomalous traits. In the 1700s, missionaries were instructed to report any cases of oversized remains or strange physical features. Their letters sometimes mentioned people with towering height or extra digits. These reports were sent to Rome and then locked away. In the 1960s, the Vatican quietly supported research into the elongated skulls of Peru. The public was told the project reached no conclusions. Yet certain samples were removed and never returned. Today, the Church still monitors genetic studies around the world. They track discoveries of unknown ancestry lines. They follow cases of unexplained gigantism. They collect records of families with rare traits that match ancient descriptions. Some believe the Vatican is searching for proof that the Nephilim survived. Others think they already know the truth and are simply watching to make sure the world never uncovers it. The more DNA science advances, the closer we come to revealing things hidden since the earliest days of history. And maybe that is why the Vatican watches so closely. Because genetics may someday expose the oldest secret of all. A secret written not in books, but in the blood that flows quietly through certain families even today. Since the beginning of human memory, people have looked to the sky and wondered who or what lived beyond it. Ancient cultures did more than wonder. They recorded encounters with beings they said descended from the stars. They described rulers who claimed their ancestors came from the heavens. They built temples aligned with constellations as if inviting those beings to return. These stories appear in every corner of the world, and long before the Vatican existed, people believed the skies were filled with powerful watchers who shaped the fate of humanity. In Mesopotamia, the earliest kings were called the Anunnaki, which means those who came down from above. The Sumerians said these rulers were giant in size and carried knowledge ordinary humans could never possess. In Egypt, pharaohs were believed to be children of sky gods. Their spirits were said to return to the stars when they died. Statues show them with elongated heads and towering frames. Their royal crowns pointed upward like symbols of their heavenly origin. In Mesoamerica, Mayan and Aztec rulers claimed descent from star serpents, beings who fell from the sky, bringing math, astronomy, and forbidden wisdom. Across the Pacific, the Polynesians spoke of tall, shining ones who came from the sky islands and taught them navigation. Even the Greeks believed that the gods lived among them and that some heroes were born from unions between mortals and beings who fell from the heavens. These global similarities are impossible to ignore. They do not feel like random myths. They feel like memories preserved through different languages. Memories of beings who descended from above and mingled with humanity. The Bible contains this same pattern, but in a far more controlled and edited form. In Genesis, it says the sons of God came down to the daughters of men. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers descend upon Mount Hermon and bring heavenly knowledge to earth. Their children, the Nephilim, are described as mighty ones, giants, whose existence filled the world with chaos. These are not stories of demons. They are stories of star beings. But when the early church gained authority, these ancient tales created a problem. They blurred the line between heaven and earth, and threatened the idea that only God's will shaped humanity. So the Vatican reshaped the myths. The Watchers were no longer powerful beings from the heavens. They became fallen angels, twisted monsters cast from paradise. The star-born rulers of ancient cultures were rebranded as pagans or deceivers. The Nephilim were reinterpreted as symbols of evil rather than literal beings who once walked the earth. Anything that hinted at humanity's connection to sky beings was rewritten in the language of demonology. The Church could not allow people to believe earthly kings shared blood with celestial beings, or that ancient societies were shaped by visitors from beyond. That idea threatened the entire structure of human hierarchy. It suggested humanity was not created weak and dependent. It suggested humans had once lived alongside beings far greater than ourselves. By transforming star-descended myths into stories of demons, the Vatican protected a simpler narrative. A narrative where only one source of truth existed and all other ancient memories were labelled dangerous. Yet the old stories still whisper the same message. The giants were real, the Watchers were real, and long before written history, humanity believed the sky was not empty but filled with beings who once changed the world. Throughout Europe, there are quiet rumours whispered by villagers and old storytellers. Rumours that say many of the first churches were not built on empty ground, but on something far older, something buried, something the Church did not want the world to find. These stories claim that beneath the stone floors of old chapels and cathedrals lie ancient burial mounds belonging to a race of beings much larger than humans. Beings remembered in myth as giants. At first it sounds like nothing more than folklore, but when you follow the trail of these legends across different countries, the pattern becomes too clear to ignore. In Ireland, ancient people spoke of the Fomorians, a giant race said to have lived long before the arrival of humans. When Christian monks spread across the island, they built several early churches directly on top of old megalithic tombs. Scholars claim this was symbolic. The villagers claimed it was deliberate. They said the monks were covering the graves of the giants with holy ground so their spirits could never rise again. In England, many churches from the 6th and 7th centuries sit on top of round barrows that once held enormous skeletons. Local stories say the builders found bones far larger than any normal person. The church quickly sealed the mounds and declared the land sacred. Once the foundations were laid, no one was allowed to dig there again. In France, old cathedrals in regions like the Loire Valley were built over long-forgotten cairns. Written records from the Middle Ages mention workers uncovering unusual bones, only to have priests order them reburied at once. Some of these bones were described as massive, with skulls thicker than stone helmets. In Eastern Europe, the legends grow even stranger. Villagers tell of churches erected on top of giant graves to hide the remains from outsiders. Stories describe buried chambers beneath the altars where enormous skeletons were found positioned as if in ceremonial rest. Priests insisted these were ancient saints, but the villagers knew the truth. They said these bodies came from a time when giants walked the earth. Even in the Holy Land, whispers continue about churches built over Canaanite and Rephaim burial sites. The Rephaim were described in the Bible as a race of giants. Some early Christian buildings stand directly above these ancient tombs. Archaeologists often request permission to investigate, but access is rarely granted. The Church rarely explains why. A common theme appears in all these stories. The Church absorbed older sacred sites and replaced them with its own structures. On the surface, this practice was meant to convert pagan worshippers. But what if the goal was something else? What if the church knew the ground held evidence of giant bloodlines and wanted to cover it? Sanctifying the land meant sealing it. Declaring it holy meant no one could disturb it. Building a church on top was the perfect lock. Some believe the Vatican kept careful records of these discoveries. Each time an oversized skeleton was found, the information was sent to higher authorities, and the site was quietly covered. For centuries, this pattern ensured that the physical proof of giants remained hidden beneath religious stone. Perhaps the most unsettling idea is not that churches were built on these graves, but that someone wanted these graves forgotten. Someone wanted the world to never see the remains of beings who did not fit the official story. Bones too large, skulls too strange, evidence too ancient, evidence that giants were real and that their memory lies buried beneath holy ground, waiting for the world to remember what once walked the earth. In the hidden corners of ancient prophecy, there is a warning almost no one talks about, a warning that appears in the Book of Enoch, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the writings of early church fathers, and even in certain passages of the Bible itself. It speaks of a time at the end of the age, when the boundaries between heaven and earth weaken, and the beings who once walked among humans return. Not angels, not demons in the way most people imagine them, but giants. The same hybrid beings the ancient world called the Nephilim. According to these old texts, the flood wiped out their bodies, but not their spirits. Their shadows remained trapped between worlds, wandering in hunger and rage. Some writings claim these spirits became the origin of evil in the world. Others go even further and say that in the last days they will take form again. In the Book of Enoch, a prophecy states that when the final generation arrives, the giants will rise once more. Their return is described not as a myth, but as a terrifying event connected to chaos, war, and the collapse of nations. The Book of Isaiah hints at something similar. It speaks of the Rephaim rising from their ancient resting places. The word Rephaim in Hebrew refers to giant beings who existed long before the time of Israel. Later translations softened the word into phrases like departed spirits or shades, but the original meaning was clear. It meant giants. The Book of Revelation also contains strange descriptions of enormous beings that emerge during the final tribulation. They are described as powerful, destructive, and unlike normal humans. Most churches explain these as symbols, but early scholars did not. They believed Revelation referenced the return of ancient hybrids, whose presence once filled the world with violence. Even the Dead Sea Scrolls, found in the caves of Qumran, mention a final battle where giant beings influenced by the Watchers appear again. These scrolls belong to a Jewish sect that preserved far older teachings than the versions kept by the mainstream temple. Their writings speak directly about the Nephilim returning in the last days to join the forces of darkness. What makes all of this more unsettling is how rarely the Vatican discusses these prophecies. They acknowledge demons, they acknowledge spirits, but they avoid the subject of the giants almost completely. It is as if the Church fears that talking about them will open a door they spent centuries trying to seal. Some believe the Vatican's silence is a way to prevent panic. Others think it is because the Church knows more than it says. In the 1500s, certain theologians warned that the fallen angels who created the Nephilim would try to repeat their rebellion before the end. In the 1700s, a Jesuit priest wrote of signs that would mark the giants' return, such as unexplained astronomical phenomena and the rise of strange powers among certain bloodlines. His work was banned and hidden in the archives. Today, many people sense that the world is moving towards some kind of revelation. Old mysteries are resurfacing. Ancient structures linked to giants are being re-examined. Strange sightings appear across the globe. The pieces of a forgotten story are assembling once again. And if the old prophecies are true, the return of the giants is not just part of the past, it may be part of the future. A future the Vatican has been trying to delay for centuries, because once these beings step into the world again, everything humanity believes about its own history will collapse. Long before the Bible was shaped into the book, people know today there was another text held in high honor by ancient believers. A text quoted by early Christians, studied by Jewish scholars, and respected by entire civilizations, the Book of Enoch. It was once considered so important that some early church fathers treated it as scripture. Yet when the canon was finally formed, the Book of Enoch vanished. It did not fade away by accident, it was removed with intention. And the deeper you look into its pages, the clearer the motives become. Enoch tells a story that is far more detailed than Genesis. It describes the angels who left their heavenly place. It names the Watchers. It explains their descent onto Mount Hermon. It reveals exactly how they taught humanity forbidden knowledge, from metallic weapons to sorcery to celestial secrets. And it describes the birth of the Nephilim in vivid detail. According to Enoch, the giants were enormous, violent, and consumed everything in sight. Their presence filled the earth with chaos until God intervened. Genesis only hints at this story in a few short lines. Enoch gives the full account. That alone made the book dangerous. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, church leaders were trying to build a clear hierarchy between heaven and earth. They wanted angels to be perfect heavenly messengers, not beings capable of rebellion, desire, and consequences. The Book of Enoch painted a picture that made angels look too close to humanity. It showed heavenly beings breaking laws, forming pacts, and producing hybrids. This blurred the strict spiritual order the church wanted to teach. Even more troubling was the idea that the giants appeared again after the flood. Enoch explained how their spirits remained on earth and continued influencing humanity. This created a worldview where unseen forces played a constant role in human history. A worldview the Vatican did not want as it tried to consolidate religious authority. The political motives were just as strong. The Book of Enoch claimed that powerful beings once ruled over humanity. Rulers with supernatural ancestry. Rulers connected to forbidden knowledge. If people believed this, they might question the authority of kings, priests, and the church itself. They might ask whether earthly leaders were really chosen by God or simply inheritors of ancient bloodlines. This was a threat the early church could not allow. By removing the Book of Enoch, the Vatican gained control over the narrative. Angels became flawless and distant. Giants became symbols instead of literal beings. The Watchers were pushed into the shadows. The messy ancient world was replaced with a cleaner version that supported the structure of the growing church. Over time, the book became so forbidden that owning it could lead to punishment. For more than 1,000 years, Enoch survived only in Ethiopia, guarded by a church far outside Rome's influence. When Europeans finally rediscovered it in the 1700s, they were shocked. Here was the missing story. Here were the details that explained Genesis. Here was the truth about the Watchers and the giants. Suddenly the question became obvious. Why had the Vatican tried so hard to bury this book? The answer has stayed the same across the centuries. Enoch reveals too much. Too much about the angels, too much about the giants. Too much about the past the Vatican hoped the world would forget. In quiet corners of universities and behind the closed doors of dusty libraries, there exists a group of scholars who live with a secret they cannot share. They are historians, linguists, archaeologists, and even theologians who have spent their lives studying ancient texts and forgotten civilizations. And in private conversations, when no cameras are rolling and no microphones are near, they admit something they could never publish. The evidence for giants is compelling. The Nephilim story is not a myth. Something powerful and ancient once walked the earth. Most of these scholars do not begin their careers chasing forbidden ideas. They start with normal research, a dig site in the Middle East, a translation of an old manuscript, a re-examination of a biblical passage. But as they explore deeper, they find things that do not fit the accepted timeline. Skeletons larger than humans, mythical beings described as if they were real, megalithic structures that could only have been built by enormous strength, DNA markers that should not exist. They begin connecting the dots, and the picture that forms frightens them. A picture of a world shaped by beings science has no category for. A world the Vatican has spent centuries trying to hide. Some of these scholars confide only to trusted colleagues. They form a whisper network, a hidden circle where ideas can be discussed freely as long as they never leave the room. In these whispered conversations, they talk about manuscripts locked in the Vatican's secret archives. They talk about excavation reports that mysteriously disappeared. They talk about bones collected by major institutions and never shown again. They talk about ancient texts that match each other too perfectly, even when written by cultures separated by oceans. Many of them wish they could speak openly. They know the world deserves to see the evidence. But they also know what happens to anyone who challenges the official version of history. They have seen other researchers lose their funding. They have seen professors fired for publishing controversial articles. They have seen books pulled from shelves, and journals refuse to print anything that hints at forbidden ancestry. Some scholars have even faced public humiliation. Their credibility attacked, their reputation destroyed, all because they dared to question the clean story taught in classrooms. The fear is real. It hangs over their careers like a shadow. In private emails, they share photos of oversized skulls. In late-night conversations, they discuss passages from the Book of Enoch. In secret meetings at academic conferences, they trade stories of discoveries that will never reach the public. One historian admitted that ancient kings were described as half-divine because they actually carried hybrid blood. Another confessed that early church writings confirmed the existence of the Nephilim before the canon was finalized. A linguist said certain Hebrew words were intentionally mistranslated to hide references to giants. None of them will say these things publicly, not yet, but they all agree on one thing: the truth is too big to stay buried forever. And as more evidence surfaces, as more ancient texts are uncovered, as more people begin to question the official story, the whisper network grows louder. These scholars know a storm is coming, a moment when the truth they have guarded in silence will finally reach the world. And when that day comes, the story of humanity will change forever. From the moment the early church began shaping its authority, one decision stood above all others. The past had to be rewritten, not cleaned up, not gently corrected, rewritten. Because the ancient world was filled with stories, artifacts, and memories that painted a picture far more complicated than the simple narrative the church wanted the world to accept. And at the center of that lost picture stood the Nephilim. Their existence was a threat so great that it had to be erased layer by layer until only fragments of the truth remained in whispers and ruined stones. The cover-up did not begin with archaeology. It began with scripture. When early church leaders gathered to decide which books belonged in the Bible, they removed texts that mentioned giants too clearly. The Book of Enoch described the Watchers descending on Mount Hermon, teaching forbidden knowledge, and creating the Nephilim. The Book of Jubilees explained how their spirits survived the flood. Other writings described ancient wars against giant clans that once ruled the earth. These books were not destroyed by chance. They were removed on purpose. The church needed a clean story, a story where creation was simple and humanity was the only race shaped by God. Anything that suggested humans once shared the world with powerful hybrid beings had to be silenced. Then came the archaeology. As Europe expanded into new lands, explorers found giant bones in burial mounds. Native tribes described ancient wars against towering red-haired enemies. Farmers uncovered skeletons far too large for normal humans. Each discovery should have rewritten history. Instead, many were taken by museums, sealed in boxes, or quietly destroyed. The Smithsonian collected countless remains from the 19th and early 20th centuries, yet almost none of them remain in public view. Reports were rewritten, artifacts vanished, and somehow every dig that pointed to giants ended the same way: silence. In the Middle East, the situation was even more controlled. Excavations near biblical sites were monitored by church authorities who decided which findings were released. Bones that did not fit human proportions were reburied. Strange skulls disappeared into private collections. Ancient megalithic structures, built with stones so massive only giants could have moved them, were attributed to unknown cultures with no explanation. All the while, the Vatican built the largest private archive in the world. A vault stretching miles beneath its city walls, filled with documents the public has never seen. Rumours speak of manuscripts from the Temple Mount, early versions of Genesis that mention the Watchers, letters from bishops describing giant skeletons found centuries ago, reports from missionaries who discovered oversized remains and sent them back to Rome. Every piece of evidence that threatened the official story was locked away. The Church's rise to power depended on the idea that humanity was the centre of creation. If giants once ruled the earth, if angels once mixed with humans, if forbidden knowledge shaped early civilization, then the Church was no longer the sole guardian of truth. It would be just one chapter in a much older story. So the Nephilim had to vanish, their bones hidden, their stories labelled myth, their history replaced with a safer version that kept the world obedient and unaware. Yet despite all the efforts, the truth never fully died. It survived in legends, in ruins, in forgotten books, and in the few brave scholars who whispered what they were not allowed to say. And now the pieces are returning, slowly, quietly, forming the outline of the greatest cover-up in human history. A cover-up built not to hide monsters, but to hide the real origins of the world we live in. For thousands of years, people assumed the story of the Nephilim ended with the flood. They imagined the giants drowning beneath rising waters, while Noah's family became the new beginning of humanity. But when you sift through the evidence scattered across scripture, archaeology, genetics, and forgotten history, a different picture appears. A picture that suggests the bloodline of the giants did not vanish. It adapted, it hid, and it survived. The Bible itself hints at this. Long after the flood, the Israelites encountered the Anakim, the Rephaim, and the Emim, tribes described as tall, powerful, and descended from the ancient giants. Even King Og of Bashan was said to be a remnant of that old race. His iron bed stretched more than 13 feet long. If the giants reappeared after the flood, then someone in the ark carried their blood, or something else preserved it. Ancient cultures across the world echoed the same idea. Egyptian pharaohs claimed divine ancestry from sky beings. Mesopotamian kings traced their lineage to watchers from above. Celtic myths spoke of tall, shining ones who intermarried with early humans. Asian emperors insisted they descended from star gods. These traditions were not isolated. They formed a global message that the blood of the giants had become woven into the families who ruled nations. Over time, these bloodlines did not fade. They grew more careful. They hid their ancestry through controlled marriages, secret alliances, and rituals meant to preserve their traits. Some modern families with centuries of influence still guard their genealogy, as if protecting a treasure. Their members stand unusually tall. They display rare physical characteristics, like polydactyly or unusual skull shapes. They possess sharp intelligence and uncanny instincts. Of course, none of this is discussed publicly. But behind closed doors, genealogists, private researchers, and even certain religious authorities track these traits quietly. The Vatican has long monitored families with unusual heritage. Their records mention lineages that stretch back into biblical times. Some of these families have members who entered politics, banking, royalty, or high positions in the church itself. The pattern is subtle but undeniable. Height beyond the norm. Strength that defies explanation. Eyes that seem brighter or differently shaped. A charisma that draws people in. And sometimes a secrecy that feels ancient. Stories from small towns tell of individuals who towered over their neighbours, yet avoided attention. Old photographs show people who look slightly out of place, as if carrying something older in their bones. Even DNA studies reveal rare markers that appear in isolated families across Europe, the Middle East, and parts of the Americas. These markers do not fit typical genetic categories. Some scientists quietly admit they look like remnants of an unknown ancestry. The truth may be simple. The Nephilim line did not end. It blended into humanity. It became kings, warlords, explorers, priests, and eventually ordinary-looking people whose ancient heritage hides behind modern clothing and familiar faces. You may have passed someone on the street who carries that blood. You may have seen a leader on television who shows traces of the old traits. The giants no longer stand in open fields or build cities of stone. They walk among us. Normal enough to be unnoticed. Different enough to leave a whisper of unease. And if the ancient prophecies are right, their presence is not accidental. It is part of a story still unfolding. A story that links the earliest days of creation to the world we live in now. A story the Vatican tried to bury but could never fully erase. Because the greatest secret of all is not that the giants once lived, it is that their descendants never left.